Snow whipped across the street like shards of glass when the black SUV screeched to a halt. A man in a tailored coat stepped out only to freeze. In the blizzard's chaos, a little girl stood in traffic clutching a crying baby and a crushed candy box. Cars swerved, horns blared, and her boots slipped on the ice. The next moment, the millionaire was running through snow, through noise, his breath burning as he caught her just before she fell. He didn't know her name, he didn't know why his chest ached, but he knew everything was about to change. If you want to know what happens next, stay with me until the end of the video. And if you still believe deep in your heart that God is always watching over you, silently arranging everything, then right now, leave a comment saying amen below this video. Because who knows, at the very moment you write those words, a blessing may quietly enter your life. The wind over Whitefish Lake carried a kind of silence that could pierce through bone. It was the silence of deep winter, the kind that swallowed sound and left only the crunch of boots on frozen snow. Elliot Grayson had grown used to it. He told himself he liked it, even needed it. For 2 years since that January night when a blizzard had taken his wife and the unborn child, he never got to hold quiet had become both punishment and companion. His house, a glass and steel structure perched above the frozen lake, stood like an island in a sea of white. The world outside was cold, clean, and empty, much like the world inside him. Each morning he drove into town with Scout, his golden retriever, sitting in the passenger seat. The dog's calm eyes followed every flake of snow that hit the windshield, as if studying the rhythm of winter itself. That morning, the thermometer on the dash blinked 4 degrees below zero. Elliot barely noticed. He parked near Main Street, tugged on his gloves, and let Scout out for their usual walk. The small mountain town was still waking. Street lights hummed faintly, and the mountains beyond were veiled in fog. Somewhere a train moaned through the valley, a lonely, hollow sound that seemed to echo straight through him. He was supposed to be on a video call in an hour, investors from Zurich, a deal his board had spent 6 months preparing. But for reasons he didn't care to name, he had left home early. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe it was that faint gnawing need to feel something other than numbers and screens. As he walked past the old bakery, Scout paused, ears pricking. Elliot followed the dog's gaze toward the intersection. There, through the swirl of falling snow, he saw her. A little girl, small, too small for the oversized coat swallowing her frame, stood in the crosswalk holding a cardboard box. In one arm, she cradled a bundled infant, his head buried under a thin fleece blanket. Her lips were pale, her cheeks raw from the wind. Each car that rolled to a stop sent gusts of icy air spinning around her, but she didn't flinch. She simply lifted her voice again and again, soft but determined. "Candy for $1, please. My baby brother's sick." Elliot froze. The scene felt unreal, like something misplaced from another world. Drivers stared straight ahead, pretending not to see her. One man rolled his window up without a word. Another honked when the light turned green. The little girl didn't cry. She just stepped to the next car, her boots sliding slightly on the packed snow. When her foot caught a patch of ice, time seemed to slow. The child wobbled, clutching the baby tighter, her knees buckling. The box of candy flew from her hands, scattering across the street like brown confetti. Elliot's body moved before his mind did. He sprinted forward, heart pounding against his ribs. Scout barked sharply behind him. The icy air burned his lungs as he reached her just in time, one arm catching the girl, the other steadying the infant pressed to her chest. "I got you," he said, breathless. The little girl blinked up at him, startled but silent. Her eyes gray-green, the color of storm water, were far too old for someone so young. I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to fall." "It's all right," Elliot said softly. "You're okay now." But the baby wasn't. A rough cough rattled from the tiny bundle, followed by a wheeze so shallow it made the hairs on Elliot's neck stand up. The girl's eyes widened with panic. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking. "He can't breathe." Elliot glanced around. The light had turned green again, cars swerving impatiently around them, horns blaring. Snow whipped sideways across the street, stinging his face. Without another thought, he lifted both children into his arms and carried them to the curb. "What's your name?" he asked once they reached the sidewalk. "Ruby," she said, trembling. "Ruby Hale. And this is Finn. Ruby, how long has he been sick?" "Since yesterday, maybe longer. My aunt said it's just a cold, but he feels so hot. We don't got medicine." The baby coughed again, his little body convulsing. Elliot felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Urgency, fear, compassion. He didn't think, he acted. "My car's right there," he said. "Come on." Ruby hesitated, glancing back toward the alley behind the wow station, as if expecting someone to yell her a name, but no one came. Only the wind answered, swirling snow around their feet. "It's okay," Elliot said, his voice steady but kind. "Let's get your brother warm." She nodded once, trusting him in that fragile, instinctive way children sometimes do. A minute later, the SUV's heater roared to life. Warm air filled the cabin, fogging the windows. Ruby sat in the back seat with Finn on her lap. Scout turned from the front and rested his head gently on her knee, as if promising safety. Elliot adjusted the heat, checked the rearview mirror, and saw Ruby's small hand stroking the dog's fur. For the first time that winter, he felt the faintest trace of warmth inside his chest. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, endless, and white. The heater hummed softly as Elliot drove through the quiet streets of Whitefish. Snow fell in heavy, swirling sheets, muting the world beyond the windshield. Inside the SUV, warmth slowly replaced the sharp bite of winter air. Ruby sat rigid in the back seat, clutching Finn tightly. Her cheeks had lost some of their color, but her eyes stayed wide and watchful, the kind of eyes that had already learned not to trust too easily. Elliot glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "How old are you, Ruby?" "7," she answered after a pause. "Finn just turned 1. He likes music." She added that last part as if it mattered, as if it could somehow explain why she was out there in the cold selling candy to strangers. "Where do you live?" he asked gently. "With my aunt." Behind the tire shop, Ruby said, her voice thin. "She says we can't stay long 'cause rent's due. We used to have a house before the crash." Elliot's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't ask more. The way her voice cracked on that last word said enough. He knew that tone. He'd heard it in himself in the mirror when he'd spoken about his wife for the first and last time. Scout whined softly, turning his head toward Ruby. The girl reached out, stroking his golden fur with trembling fingers. "He's warm," she murmured. "He's a good listener," Elliot said. The faintest smile tugged at her lips. "Finn likes dogs too." The baby stirred, letting out a weak cough that turned into a rasping wheeze. Ruby froze, panic flashing across her face. "He's getting worse, isn't he?" Elliot looked in the mirror again. Finn's tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. His lips were pale, his forehead slick with sweat. Every instinct in Elliot screamed at him to hurry. He pressed down on the gas. "We're going to the hospital," he said firmly. Ruby shook her head, tears springing to her eyes. "We can't. Aunt Marlene says hospitals cost money." Elliot met her gaze in the mirror, his tone steady. "You don't have to worry about that. I've got it covered." She hesitated, then whispered, "You promise I promise." The words came out quietly, but they filled the car with something stronger than heat trust. When they pulled up to the hospital entrance, the parking lot lights cut through the snowfall, painting long golden streaks on the ground. Elliot jumped out, opened the back door, and carefully lifted Finn from Ruby's arms. The baby's head lolled weakly against his chest. "Stay close," he said, and Ruby scrambled after him, her boots slipping on the icy pavement. Inside, the fluorescent brightness felt almost violent after the dim hush of the storm. The nurse at the triage desk looked up, startled. "Sir, can I help you?" "This baby, he's having trouble breathing," Elliot said. His voice came out sharper than he intended. "He needs a doctor now." The nurse sprang into motion, waving them through the double doors. "Are you the father?" she asked as they hurried down the hall. There was a pause, just a heartbeat, but it stretched long enough for something to shift in Elliot's chest. "Yes," he said quietly. "For now, yes." Ruby looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and cold. She didn't correct him. They reached an exam room where another nurse gently took Finn from Elliot's arms and placed him on a gurney. Machines beeped, oxygen hissed, and the baby let out a faint cry as they fitted a mask over his face. Ruby clutched the edge of Elliot's coat, eyes wide. "He's gonna be okay, right?" Elliot knelt down beside her. "They're helping him now," he said softly. "He's safe." A nurse asked for names, birth dates, any insurance information. Ruby answered what she could, her small voice steady but weary. When the nurse asked for a guardian, she hesitated. Elliot's hand went to hers. "You can put me down," he said. "Elliot Grayson." The nurse scribbled the name without question. Minutes later, Finn's breathing steadied under the hiss of oxygen. Ruby leaned over him, whispering softly. "You did good," Elliot said. "He's tough, just like his sister." For the first time, she looked at him fully. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. Elliot opened his mouth, but no words came. He wasn't sure himself. Maybe because he couldn't save the family he lost. Maybe because he couldn't bear to lose another. He took a slow breath. "Because someone should have stopped for you sooner," he said at last. Ruby blinked, and something fragile yet unbreakable passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. Outside, snow continued to fall silent and endless, blanketing the world in white, as if trying to start it all over again. By the time the clock above the nurse's station ticked past 9, the storm outside had turned wild. Snow slanted hard against the hospital windows, coating the glass in white. Inside, the world glowed sterile and bright, too clean, too still. Ruby sat curled in a plastic chair near the doorway, her knees pulled to her chest, watching the doctors move around her brother. Elliot stood beside her, arms crossed his coat, damp and heavy. He felt like he'd been holding his breath for hours. Every soft beep from the heart monitor tugged at something deep inside him. Finn's tiny chest rose and fell beneath the tangle of tubes and wires. The nurse adjusted the oxygen mask, murmuring something about fever and fluids, but Elliot barely heard her. All he could see was that fragile rhythm, up, down, up again. When the nurse finally stepped back and said, "He's stable for now," the air seemed to loosen around him. Ruby exhaled a shaky breath and wiped her face with her sleeve. "Can I stay with him?" she asked. The nurse hesitated, glancing toward Elliot. He nodded before the woman could speak. "She stays," he said. "I'll be right here too." The nurse gave a small nod. "Right. We'll need a parent or guardian signature for overnight care." "I'll sign," Elliot replied, his voice steady but low. Ruby looked up at him, confusion flickering behind her exhaustion. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said simply, and that was that. As the nurse left, Ruby slid off her chair and moved closer to Finn's bed. Scout lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, eyes never leaving the children. The golden fur against the sterile white floor felt like a small, stubborn bit of sunlight that refused to fade. Elliot sank into the chair beside Ruby. His body ached, but it wasn't fatigue, it was the weight of everything pressing down on him. The smell of disinfectant reminded him of another hospital, another winter, the sound of machines marking the last minutes of a life that never got a beginning. His wife Emily had always loved the snow. She used to laugh that winter felt like a clean slate. Now every snowstorm felt like a reminder of all he'd lost. Ruby's voice pulled him back. "You look sad," she said softly. He blinked. "Do I?" She nodded. "You look like my dad used to before the crash." He always stared out the window like he was somewhere else. Elliot swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'm sorry, Ruby." "It's okay," she said after a moment. "He's with Mom now. That's what I tell Finn when he cries." Her matter-of-fact tone pierced him more than any tears could. He turned away, pretending to study the monitors, because if he met her gaze, he might unravel. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. Finn's breathing steadied, his fever dropped a little. When the lights dimmed for the night, Ruby finally drifted off in the chair beside the bed, her head resting against Scout's warm flank. Elliot watched them, two small lives wrapped in exhaustion and trust, and felt something stir in him that he hadn't felt since before grief hollowed him out. Purpose, maybe even hope. But peace didn't last long. The next morning he stepped into the hallway to grab coffee. Two orderlies stood near the vending machine, whispering their voices sharp even in hushed tones. "That's him," one said, "the tech guy. Picked up 2 kids off the street last night." "Yeah, I saw it on the news feed. They're saying it looked weird." Elliot froze. His hand tightened around the coffee cup. "Videos all over Facebook," the other continued. "Some guy filmed him holding that little girl in the snow. People are calling it creepy. You know how it goes." Elliot's stomach dropped. He didn't wait to hear more. He walked away, pulse hammering in his ears. Outside the room, his reflection caught in the window, disheveled, unshaven eyes, dark with exhaustion. And for a fleeting moment, he almost understood why the world might see a monster instead of a man. Inside, Ruby was awake, sitting cross-legged on the chair, humming softly to Finn. She smiled when she saw him. "He's breathing better," she said. "That's good," Elliot managed, though his throat felt tight. A nurse came in, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Grayson," she said cautiously, "there are reporters asking questions at the front desk. Something about a video." Ruby's face paled. "Video? It's all right," Elliot said quickly, forcing calm into his voice. "I'll handle it." He stepped into the hallway again and took a deep breath. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He'd just tried to help. But now somehow the world had twisted kindness into suspicion. By noon, his phone was buzzing nonstop. News alerts, missed calls, messages from the board. His assistant, June Navarro, texted Elliot, "Don't panic, call me. Brent is spinning this story, says you were seen with underage kids. He's pushing for a board suspension." He stared at the message, disbelief giving way to fury. Brent, of course it was him, always waiting for a chance to strike. That afternoon, while Ruby napped beside Finn, Elliot stepped outside into the cold. The snow had slowed to a steady drift, soft flakes settling on his shoulders. He tilted his face up to the sky, exhaling a cloud of white breath. For the first time, he didn't feel the cold. He felt anger, yes, but underneath it, a quiet resolve. If the world wanted to twist his story, he would fight to tell it right. For Ruby, for Finn, for himself. He turned back toward the hospital doors, watching the faint reflection of Scout padding behind him. The wind caught his coat, fluttering it like a flag in the pale afternoon light. Somewhere deep inside, a voice he hadn't heard in years whispered, "Don't walk away this time." And he didn't. By the next morning, the story had spread far beyond Whitefish. National outlets picked it up, twisting it into headlines meant to sting reclusive tech CEO found with 2 children in Snowstorm. The thumbnail photo, Elliot cradling Ruby against the icy night, circulated across every platform. The world didn't see the fear in the child's eyes or the snow slicing through the air. They saw what they wanted, a scandal. When June Navarro called again, her voice was tight with urgency. "Elliot, you need to stay off social media. Brent's feeding this to the press. He's hinting you use the foundation's funds to cover inappropriate behavior." Elliot stood by the hospital window watching the parking lot disappear under new snow. "He's turning kindness into a weapon," he muttered. June hesitated. People believe what scares them most. "But listen, Clara Brooks, the social worker, she's on your side. She called me this morning. She says the CPS inquiry is standard, not hostile. They just have to make sure the kids are safe." "Safe," Elliot repeated softly, glancing toward the room, where Ruby sat coloring beside Finn's bed. "She's safer than she's been in months." Still, the thought of strangers doubting him clawed at his chest. He had built an empire on control. Numbers. Contracts, outcomes. But this was chaos. No data could defend a man's heart. When Clara arrived that afternoon, her presence filled the room with quiet steadiness. She was in her mid-50s, wrapped in a wool coat dusted with snow. Her gray hair framed a face both kind and firm. "Mr. Grayson," she said, extending her hand, "I'm here to check on the children." "Of course," Elliot said, stepping aside. Ruby looked up warily as Clara knelt beside her. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Clara. How's your brother feeling?" "Better," Ruby whispered. "He slept all night." Clara smiled. "Good. And how are you?" Ruby shrugged. "Warm. We got soup." Elliot's throat tightened at the simplicity of it. Warm. Soup. For her, that was luxury. Clara turned back to him. "The hospital confirmed you paid for their stay. That's generous, but it complicates things legally." "You're not family. I understand," he said quietly. "Still," she added, studying him, "they seem to trust you. That matters." Her gaze softened as she watched Ruby giggle at Scout, nudging her hand. "Children know when someone's safe," she said. "You can't fake that." Before she left, Clara handed him a form. "This allows temporary guardianship. It protects both you and them until CPS concludes the case. Sign if you are willing." Elliot looked down at the paper. His name already sat on so many contracts, each one built on profit, not people. This one felt different. He took the pen. "I'm willing." When Clara left, Ruby tugged his sleeve. "Does that mean we can stay with you?" He smiled faintly. "For now, yes." Her face lit up and something inside him, cracked the same fragile hope he'd buried years ago, began to breathe again. That night, when the hospital hallways dimmed and nurses moved like shadows, Elliot sat by Finn's bed. The soft beep of monitors blended with the distant hum of the storm outside. Ruby had fallen asleep curled up beside Scout, her small hands still tangled in the dog's fur. Elliot leaned back in the chair, exhaustion pressing heavy behind his eyes. Yet sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed them, he saw headlines, comments, faces of strangers judging from afar. The noise of the world had followed him into this quiet place. He reached for his phone, another dozen missed calls. His board demanded an official statement. Reporters wanted interviews. The Zurich investors threatened to withdraw. He turned the screen face down. Then softly Ruby's voice drifted through the half-dark. "Mr. Grayson." He looked over. She was sitting up, eyes drowsy. "You're not sleeping," she murmured. "Neither are you," he said gently. She hesitated. "Are you in trouble because of us?" He opened his mouth to deny it, but stopped. The truth settled somewhere between them, fragile and raw. "Some people think bad things," he admitted. "They don't know the truth yet." Ruby's brow furrowed. "But you helped us. You're good." He smiled a weary, grateful smile. "Thank you, Ruby. That means more than you know." She reached across the small gap between their chairs, her tiny hand resting on his. "My mom used to say, if you tell the truth and keep being kind, the storm can't last forever." Elliot stared at their hands, his rough and scarred from work. Hers small and chapped from cold, and felt tears sting his eyes. "Your mom was a smart woman." Ruby nodded solemnly. She was. Moments later, she drifted back to sleep. Elliot stayed still, listening to the sound of her breathing, of Finn's quiet sighs, of the wind brushing against the windows. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the storm was outside. It was inside him, and somehow it was finally beginning to calm. By midweek, the hospital no longer felt like shelter, but a glass cage. Reporters lingered by the entrance, their breath fogging in the cold as they waited for a glimpse of Elliot Grayson, the man the internet now loved to hate. They didn't care about Ruby or Finn, only about the story. The whispers of scandal were louder than the truth. Inside, Elliot tried to keep life steady. He brought breakfast each morning, helped Ruby read from a donated picture book, and made sure Finn's tiny hands stayed warm under soft blankets. Yet every knock on the door made his chest tighten. Every stranger's glance carried suspicion. The storm outside had found its way in. When June Navarro arrived one evening, snowflakes still clinging to her coat, she looked more like a friend than an employee. "You can't keep hiding in here," she said quietly. "Brent's building a case. He's claiming you fabricated the children's story to distract from financial fraud." Elliot sighed. "Of course he is. He's been waiting for this chance since the day I refused to sell him my shares." June set her tablet on the table screen, glowing with an article headline, "Inside the Mind of Elliot Grayson, Billionaire Savior or Master Manipulator." Below it was a blurred still from the now famous video, Elliot holding Ruby in the snow. The caption read, "Captured compassion or something darker." He closed his eyes. "How do I fight something like that?" "You don't," June said. "You show the truth." Her words hung in the air like the faint echo of hope. She opened another file, surveillance footage from a nearby gas station. The timestamp matched the night of the rescue. This one showed the full scene, Ruby slipping Elliot, lunging forward the candy box, scattering the baby's faint cry, and Elliot cradling both children as traffic stopped around them. There was no malice, only instinct, urgency, humanity. Elliot stared at the footage. "Where did you get this?" Clara helped, June said. She reached out to the station owner. He didn't even realize he had it until this morning. He rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed. "If we release this, Brent's finished," June nodded. "But it'll cost you. The board will demand you step down permanently for bringing scandal to the company, even if you are innocent." "I already lost that company the day I stopped believing in it," Elliot said quietly. "This isn't about me anymore." Later that night, he met Clara in the hallway near the pediatric wing. She looked tired but calm, a woman who had seen the world at its worst and still chose to believe in good. "June told me about the footage," she said. "I'll back you when it's time." "Thank you," he said. "And the kids, they'll be placed under temporary care once Finn's discharged," Clara replied. "But if you're serious about guardianship, there's a way." "I am," he said firmly. She studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Most people run from trouble. You ran toward it. That counts for something." The next morning, Elliot stood before the hospital's main entrance, cameras flashing like lightning in a blizzard. Reporters shouted questions. He wore no coat, only his gray sweater dusted with snow. June stood nearby, her phone live streaming the press conference. Clara waited inside with Ruby and Finn, keeping them safe from the chaos. Elliot stepped up to the microphones. His voice was calm, steady, and low. A few days ago, I stopped my car on Main Street because I saw a child fall in the snow. That's all. I didn't know her name, her story, or what the world would make of that moment. I just knew she needed help. The crowd stirred, hungry for scandal. Not Grace, he continued. Since then, people I've never met have called me a monster. They've taken a moment of kindness and turned it into fear. But I won't hide. I won't let fear decide what is good. June switched the feed to the gas station footage. On the screens behind him, the truth unfolded in silence. Snow falling, a child slipping, a man rushing forward, saving 2 lives. The crowd fell quiet. Elliot spoke again, his voice rough but unwavering. These children have been through more loss than anyone should. They don't need gossip. They need safety. And if doing the right thing makes me a headline, then so be it. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the hospital doors. Then one reporter lowered her camera. Mr. Grayson, she asked softly, why risk your reputation for 2 children you barely know? He looked straight into the lens. Because I remember what it feels like to lose everything. And I remember wishing someone had stopped for me. When the conference ended, the storm had eased. The air felt lighter. June exhaled, tears glistening. You did it, she whispered. Elliot looked at the crowd dispersing at the screens, replaying the truth, and shook his head. We did. That afternoon, Brent Calloway's downfall began. Emails exposed, statements traced. Within hours, the board suspended him. The company's stock began to recover, but Elliot didn't care. He had already made his choice. Later, he returned to the pediatric wing. Ruby was sitting by Finn's crib, reading softly from a picture book. Scout lay beside her, tail thumping, when he saw Elliot. Ruby looked up. Were they mean to you? Not anymore, he said, kneeling beside her. They saw what really happened. Did they believe you? He smiled. They didn't have to. The truth believed itself. Ruby tilted her head. Does that mean we can come home with you? Elliot's chest ached, but this time with joy. Yeah, Ruby, I think it does. Snow drifted past the window, glittering in the pale afternoon light. For the first time in years, Elliot felt warmth not from a heater or a fire, but from something deeper. Something he thought he'd lost forever. Hope. A month later, winter softened its grip on Whitefish. The days stretched longer, and the snow that once buried everything began to melt into streams along the roadside. The lake shimmered again beneath the pale sunlight, thin layers of ice drifting apart like pieces of an old memory, finally letting go. In the small cottage at the edge of the woods, laughter filled the air. Ruby's voice rose above the crackle of the fireplace as she tried to teach Scout how to shake. The golden retriever offered both paws at once, sending her into a fit of giggles. Finn, sitting on the rug in a pile of toys, clapped his tiny hands in delight. Elliot stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, watching the scene unfold. The once empty house now smelled of cinnamon and crayons filled with warmth that didn't come from the heater, but from life itself. For years, silence had been his companion. Now it was laughter. Now it was home. Clara Brooks stopped by that afternoon, her boots leaving wet prints on the porch. Paperwork's finalized, she said, smiling as she handed him a folder. You're officially their guardian, Mr. Grayson. Elliot took the papers, his hands trembling slightly. Thank you, Clara, for believing when no one else did. You made it easy, she said. You just kept showing up. When she left, Ruby came running from the kitchen, her hands sticky with cookie dough. Was that Miss Clara? It was, Elliot said, crouching to meet her eyes. She brought good news. Ruby tilted her head. What kind? The kind that means you're not going anywhere. Her eyes widened. Then she threw her arms around his neck, whispering, I told Finn we were already home. Elliot held her close, his throat tightening. Scout pressed his nose into the hug as if to seal the promise. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the pines, they walked together down the path leading to the frozen lake. The air smelled of pine and melting snow. Ruby carried Finn in her arms, and Scout trotted beside them, tail sweeping the path clean. At the shoreline, Elliot stopped. The same place where weeks ago he'd stood alone watching the snow fall heavy and endless. Now the ice reflected 3 silhouettes instead of 1. Ruby looked up at him. Do you think Mom and Dad can see us? Elliot smiled softly. I think they can, and I think they're proud of you. She nodded, satisfied. You too. The wind brushed through the trees, gentle now, almost like a blessing. Elliot reached down, taking Ruby's small hand in his. "Thank you for letting me stop," he said quietly. Ruby squeezed his hand. "Thank you for staying." They turned back toward the house, its windows glowing amber through the dusk. The sound of Finn's laughter echoed through the still air. Above them, the first stars blinked awake, steady, patient, eternal. The storm was over, and for the first time, Elliot Grayson didn't just survive the winter. He belonged to it. Today's story comes to an end, but its echo still lingers in the heart. What do you think? Give us a score from 1 to 10 and feel free to share a few words in the comments. Every voice here is valued and heard. Before you go, let me ask you gently, are you doing okay today? If your heart feels heavy, let this place be a quiet corner where you can share and find comfort. See you again in the next bedtime story where love and hope remind us that no matter how dark the night may seem, kindness will always prevail.